Gylt is a new narrative adventure title that features some good horror elements, some surprising puzzles, and some simple but solid stealth mechanics. You play as Sally. She is a young girl who is on the lookout for her missing cousin Emily, and at this point in the story, she has been gone for over a month. As you make your way through Gylt, you'll learn more about Emily's disappearance and Sally's involvement in that event. Gylt has multiple endings, all of them are player dependent, and I think that overall the narrative is pretty solid, but it's very safe. So if you're hoping that you were going to play a very twisted horror game, you are not. It is just overall solid. I do enjoy the fact that you are discovering an alternate version of the town you live in. That part I think is very cool. And I have to say, as a protagonist, I think Sally is incredibly brave. She pretty much doesn't show any real fear at times, especially when confronted with some of the more grotesque enemies in this game. I think Gylt has a pretty solid horror setting because it is an alternate version of your school. You do happen to go outside of the school as well. You go to the arcade, which I think was a really cool section. But for the most part, it's the school, the auditorium, the gymnasium, and another section I won't spoil. But for the most part, what you're going to notice is that Gylt does a really good job of escalating in regard to its environmental design. So as you make your way through the story and as you make your way through the school, because you are searching for keys to open up different areas, you do get to see these twisted versions of these areas. And Sally will constantly comment on how this place has changed and how things have gone wrong. You're going to see a number of areas that have these drawings, writings, and paintings that are all practically geared towards Sally. So there's some nice environmental storytelling, and to help further bridge the gap in regard to the narrative, you can find these diary pages left behind by Emily, and these are really good in pretty much trying to give you a glimpse of her state of mind as she is currently trapped in this location. In addition, there are inhabitants that you can find, and these are individuals that are entrapped in stone. They also have books that tell pretty lengthy tales about this alternate location, and it gives you a lot of information. And it's really interesting too. Some of these are like super twisted, which I really enjoyed because, you know, this is being seen through the eyes of a little girl, and in these small books, you get to see it through the eyes of these adults who happen to be trapped in this area. It's really recommended you help find them all because they will help you in regards to that third ending. Before we dive into the various ways that Sally can defend herself, we're going to talk about the puzzles. I don't believe there are any puzzles in this game that you're going to get stuck in, but I do feel like all of them are pretty solid. And I like the fact that as you go along, just like in terms of the game's environments, the puzzles tend to escalate in terms of difficulty and complexity, and I really enjoyed them. I really felt like they were probably the strongest part of the game, and I felt like they weren't unfair in any way, which is something that you tend to find in a lot of other horror puzzle titles in which you absolutely have little to no time to solve them because you're being chased or being attacked. It's not the case here. Sally has more than enough time to solve these puzzles, and I really like the fact that you can utilize the environment in different ways, and as you go along through the game, there are certain sections in which you'll have to utilize certain throwable items, you'll have to utilize certain items you have in your inventory. I think that this is a solid puzzle title overall and does a really good job of complementing the other gameplay components found in Gylt. Now let's get to the action. When you start out in Gylt, Sally is not able to defend herself, but within the first 30 to 40 minutes, you are given an upgrade to your flashlight, which will create a beam, and this beam will help destroy most of the monsters found in this game. If you happen to play Alan Wake in the past, Gylt follows the same type of concept. Each enemy has weak points on their body. All you have to do is concentrate the beam on that part of the body. There are usually 3, and once you hit all 3, they then disintegrate. You also have the option to conduct stealth executions, and while these are great, they consume a lot of battery. I think 2 stealth executions consumes up to 2/3 of your battery, and it's fine because there are a number of recharges around, but I really recommend that you just fight them straight up, because when you do so, you literally destroy most of these enemies and consume nothing, which I admit is a bit of a strange design choice, but I will say I found myself confronting enemies straight up most of the time, rather than sitting back and trying to stealth execute. But also, if you want to, you don't have to confront any enemy. You can just stealth around them. The pathing in this game is pretty simple, and you can also bait enemies using your flashlight or any other throwable you find. And if you played Splinter Cell or Assassin's Creed, they pretty much go to your last known location, so you can just navigate around them pretty easily. The only enemy I really recommend you don't do that to is the Crow because of their teleportation abilities, but beyond that, every enemy in this game can be navigated around pretty easily. It is recommended that you fight enemies one-on-one. If you happen to get surrounded, you are more than likely going to take a lot of damage. And when Sally gets staggered or she gets cornered, she's practically dead. Now, to counter that, around an hour and a half, 2 hours into the game, you're going to get an ability that allows you to flash enemies in the area. And I really like this ability because it's practically your get out of jail free card. I really feel like you won't be surrounded often, but if you happen to be sprinting or navigating an area in which you're not sure about how the pathing is going to work with these enemies, just flash them all. You have a pretty generous window when it comes to how long enemies are staggered for, so you're going to have way more than enough time to escape, so don't worry about that. So if you feel like combat in Gylt is easy and you want to make it a little more challenging on yourself, just remove the aim assist. The aim assist makes this game super easy, especially when you are fighting off certain enemies. But some of the abilities you get, that flash ability, you also get an extinguisher that helps freeze enemies. It really makes combat encounters kind of fun because you can just navigate around them. I think with the battery, you always have to be on the lookout for packs, but there are so many to find in the environment. With the extinguisher, it's just a simple recharge, but I really like using that to kind of freeze enemies in place because you have a long time. And I felt like it was like 10 to 15 seconds to get away and find a new hiding spot or just move on to the next section. But combat overall in this is solid. And overall, just like with the other core gameplay mechanics in stealth and puzzle solving, they all really nicely complement one another, even though I think it's clear that puzzle solving is probably its strongest suit. And then I would probably put combat a pretty nice distance behind it in terms of number 2 and then stealth 3. And the best compliment I can give about the stealth components in this game is that it's functional. There are no real flaws in it. It's not broken. It obviously borrows concepts from Splinter Cell and Assassin's Creed and does a good job of implementing it here. Every enemy has a pretty easy path to follow, so there's no real broken parts of it. It's just really predictable and really easy. So if you happen to be someone who might get turned off by stealth sections or forced stealth in a game, don't worry, it's implemented well here in Gylt, and I don't think you'll get frustrated at all. In fact, I actually liked being able to navigate around certain enemies. It kind of made it, easy for you to save resources. And there are some sections that may surprise you in regard to the stealth, but for the most part, it's functional and it can be fun. I don't believe there are really any glaring flaws in Gylt. It's a fairly polished title. I think the only nitpick I would have is that sometimes when you go to pick up an item on the ground, Sally will just kind of take multiple steps forward before she ultimately is able to grab that item, which I thought was really weird. Happened on a number of occasions. The only other real nitpick I had was that you had some puzzles in which you were trying to push a cart with a ladder on it to certain areas. And sometimes if you are just trying to get around to the side of the cart that you can grab the handle to push, Sally will go up the steps automatically, which I feel like is something that could have been solved by just pressing A to go up the ladder or something like that. I really felt it was, more than likely a quality of life decision to have us just automatically go up ladders because you cannot mantle in this game because Sally is a young girl, so she's not going to be able to just automatically climb to get over things. But I really feel like those were moments where I was kind of annoyed because there's one section where you are kind of in the way of an enemy. And so I was like, please do not screw this up. And I found myself going up the ladder automatically. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to stay up here until you de-aggro and go back onto your path. But beyond that, though, I didn't really see any glaring flaws in this game. Very well made. I really feel like Gylt is an easy game to recommend. It is a little on the easy side, but I feel like most narrative adventures shouldn't be too challenging. I do feel like there are really solid puzzles. I think the combat is serviceable. I think the stealth is serviceable. They all complement each other really well. I've spoken about that a number of times. I really feel like this game is well made. And I think that it's just overall enjoyable. I really felt like for the first hour that it was just okay. And then when it started to open up and it threw you a couple of curveballs and really kind of dug into the horror a little bit, I feel like that's when the game became really enjoyable. Because when you start to get into these new environments and new locations and you start to get put into these different scenarios, I was really enjoying myself. I feel like the boss fights were just easy. There's only a few, by the way, but they're all pretty entertaining. And I really felt like this is a game that's accessible to everyone. So if you are a fan of the narrative adventure genre and you're looking for a new game to play, I feel like Gylt is right up your alley. I just want to warn people who are going into this thinking that it's a straight, strict horror game. Once again, it is not. You barely get any jump scares in this game, but it does do a good job in regard to tension. There are a number of sections where there is a lot of tension because you go from having a few enemies around you to go around and path around to just kind of numbers of them just being thrown at you, which I found to be a lot of fun because that's a puzzle within itself. Gylt is currently sitting at $20 on Steam, and it's an easy recommendation from myself. That is going to do it for this video. If you like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.